Welcome to this evening's online event entitled Ongoing Nakba as 76 Palestinians Demand Right of Return, facilitated by the Palestinian Return Center. This evening's panel discussion will be focusing on the significance of Nakba Day 76 years on, its continuation to current day, the importance of international solidarity with the Palestinian people, and to amplify the calls of Palestinian refugees to ensure their legally enshrined right of return. Unfortunately, today, one of our speakers, Iman Abustitu, will not be able to join us. She will not be joining us this evening as she has unfortunately lost members of her family in Gaza. We're just going to open the panel discussion now with our first speaker, which is Professor Kamel Hawash. Kamel is a British Palestinian academic, analyst, and writer. Over to you, Kamel.
Thank you very much indeed, Farah. It's sad to hear of Iman's loss, but I will always remember in the first week or the week after the 7th of October, I went down to London to offer my condolences to a friend who'd lost 21 members of his family. Then that was in week one in Deir el-Balah, and I remember after offering my condolences, he lost his father, his some of his sisters, brothers, etc. I turned to him and I said, Ahmed, I hope you don't mind me asking, but who have you got left? And he said, I've got two sisters left, and they are in Gaza. He doesn't know, he didn't know at the time whether they would survive. I haven't heard any more about that. The Nakba translates into English as the catastrophe, and I would go back to 1948, but we are witnessing an off-the-scale catastrophe at the moment. People, when they talk about the Nakba, they just go back to about 1948. They might mention Balfour, but this is the product of Zionism. Let's be absolutely clear about that. It is the fact that a group of people met. Theodor Herzl, his name is one that might be familiar to people, in 1889, and they launched Zionism, and it was about finding a home for the Jews. So from the beginning, it was about trying to find somewhere to create an entity, because at the time states didn't exist really in the way that they do now. The big flaw in the whole thing was that it didn't matter if it was built on someone else's land, and this is why I go back to Zionism, because what you hear now is again Zionism, and that X% of Jews are Zionists and support Israel. So that is the continuation from that point in time. Then we come to Britain's role, the Balfour Declaration, the Balfour Letter, promise, call it whatever you want. When Lord Balfour, who was the Foreign Secretary for Britain then, decided to offer the Zionists here in the UK to offer them the facilitation of Britain, of them constructing a homeland for Jews in Palestine. So that land has always been called Palestine. And whether Zionists and those who support Israel say there was never a Palestine or before, and it's never been created, that is a load of rubbish. The people who lived on the land were called Palestinians. Even through the Ottoman Empire, different areas were referred to in different ways, but that was certainly Palestine. So Balfour Declaration offered that His Majesty's government, or Her Majesty's government, would facilitate the creation of a homeland for Jews in Palestine. And then it talked about, and this is the craziest thing you can think of from then, that the communities, the non-Jewish communities, now they made about 94 or 95% of the people who lived on the land. They were called the non-Jewish community, and it talked about them as if they had no identity, no culture, no history. So right from the outset, this was a racist promise made by a settler colonial state, which was Britain, to create a settler colonial entity in Palestine. So we need to be clear about the real origins of this. And of course, after Britain took the British mandate started in the early 20s, it did everything it could to ensure that the Palestinians didn't develop institutions, but that the Jewish Zionists who were there did develop institutions. But what it got back from them was terrorism, attacks on British soldiers. The King David Hotel bombing is one such thing, and it was led by two people, really, Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir, who were labeled terrorists by the UK, who later became prime ministers of Israel. So that is all relevant to characterize the fact that from the outset, this was a violent endeavor. It was not a peaceful endeavor. Jews were always welcomed across the Arab world, particularly after they were pushed out of Europe from Spain after the Islamic, if you like, Caliphate ended there. And they lived together. When I used to go to Syria, go to the Jewish quarter or Jewish market to buy goods. I didn't think twice about who they were. And this was after the creation of Israel. So all of that is important context, really. But there was this desire by a group to take someone else's land against their will and to then work to see ways that they could develop and to ensure that they were pushed out. So right from the outset, there was a desire to kick the Palestinians out using terrorism. The word terrorism is used extensively now by Israel and its apologists to try and label anything the Palestinians do as terrorism. And I'll give you examples, not just military endeavors, but they labeled the Palestinians going to the ICC as legal terror. They labeled the BDS movement, which is a completely peaceful movement, as economic terror. So anything the Palestinians do is defined as terrorism, but the originators of terrorism in that land were the Jewish Zionist gangs, the Stern Gang and others. And that is something we should never forget, because the way Israel uses that to frame the Palestinians as non-humans is also partly to label them as terrorists. So on the 15th of, obviously there was plenty of clashes and confrontations before the 15th of May, but on the 15th of May and following the idea to partition the land, Israel was declared to be a state and it began to be recognized. But the Palestinians since then, since 1948, have had to endure oppression and theft of their land and resources to this day, for 76 years. And it is a shame on the world that the Palestinians still don't have their rights delivered. I don't want to enter the two-state versus one-state question, but we need the Palestinians to realize their right to self-determination and for the refugees to return. Unless the refugees return, even if there was an agreement between the current Palestinian entities and Israel, there will not be peace, because peace will come when that question is settled. 750,000 Palestinians driven out in 1948, another 300,000 driven out in 1967. They have every right to go back, just like the Ukrainians have every right to go back to the Ukraine. The Syrians have every right to go back to Syria. The Palestinians have the right to return. And whatever Israel tries to portray that as, i.e., it will destroy Israel, that is simply Zionist propaganda, because Dr. Salman Abu Sitta, who was actually one of the originators of the Palestine Return Center, has amply demonstrated that the concentration of citizens of Israel leaves most of the 500 or so villages that were destroyed empty, and it is possible for the Palestinians to return. So what is needed really is for return, and then for a political solution to be found that can ensure people on that land do not have to leave, whether they are Palestinians or Jewish Israelis, that we agree that no one has to leave, and then you find a political solution to ensure that happens, and it is in line with international law. It is in line with humanity and human decency, something that Israel has completely ditched. Humanity and decency stop. And if you need any confirmation of that, just watch those thugs, these terrorist settlers who are uh, stopping the aid going to feed the hungry in Gaza, and destroying all the supplies that are needed, medical supplies and others. For me, I was not born in Palestine. I was born in Saudi Arabia. Both of my parents were born in Jerusalem, and so that is where I get my Palestinian identity from. If we move things along a bit to 1967, I will never forget uh, my mother crying in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, and I was only 5 at the time, asking her why she was crying, and she told me that my grandmother, who and my and the rest of my mother's family, who lived in Jericho, that she had been occupied. She talked about my mother has been occupied. And I'll tell you, the exact phrase was that I remember something like was occupied by the Jews. Now, of course, there were the Zionist Jews, and not every Jew is a Zionist, and not every Zionist is a Jew. But that is how it all started. I remember my mother sewing some cloth, and I only realized after it was finished that it was the Palestinian flag, because she was a dressmaker. And they were holding events to raise funds to send to Palestine to support those in 1967 who had been expelled and moved on again. Um, since then, uh, what has become clear is that particularly Western powers support Israel, whatever it does. And there's no exception to it. At the moment, as you have seen since the Gaza attack started, uh, Israel has been able to do whatever it wants. It's been supported with any weapons that it wants. And even when there was an attack on Israel from Iran, most of the Western states that are in that part of the Middle East supported Israel in defending itself. And it shows you that having done that, they haven't been telling Israel to end the killing or to end the destruction. So the Western powers and the United Nations, the Security Council, are unfortunately beholden to the United States veto, which I always call the Israeli veto, because there are very few times when Israel would have liked the veto that it has not come along. So I bring things to now because it is important. One, we have the most extreme government, a fascist leadership in Israel, a racist leadership, and a terrorist leadership, because what Israel is carrying out in Gaza is nothing short of terror. They define terrorism as using violence to achieve political goal. That is exactly what Israel is doing. It is using violence to drive the Palestinians out, and that is a political goal. And the world should be standing up to it and saying no, and they should be imposing sanctions on it, and we and others should be boycotting Israel until that happens. I think we've all been traumatized by the pictures, the videos we have seen, the complete lack of humanity by Israel, the complete barbarism. The attacks are barbaric. When you drop a 2-ton bomb on a building full of civilians, knowing you're going to murder most of them, even if you have some intelligence that there's one Hamas person there, is completely unacceptable. And talking about intelligence, to use artificial intelligence now, something that the world is grappling with, to identify tens of targets every day an algorithm. It's not even human thinking, is horrendous and completely unacceptable. Israel must face consequences for its barbaric attack on the Palestinian people. Palestinians have been really heartened by the demonstrations, particularly as we are here in the UK, and the support in the UK, to see almost 1 million people marching on one of the marches, but hundreds of thousands. Every time there is a call in London for a march, people come out because they are angry about what Israel is doing, and they are angry about our government's complicity, because it will not say to Israel, you stop what you're doing or we will cut ties with you. And they would have done with other countries if they had done that. But it seems that Israel always gets a pass. What I want to see, just to finish here, I want to see peace come to Palestine and Israel. And by that, I mean, I always separate the people from the political solution. I am not looking for anyone to be thrown in the sea or for people to be expelled. But we need a political solution that will deliver peace and justice in that area. My mother still lives with me here in Birmingham, who was born in Jerusalem, as I said earlier. And I always say, peace will come to the Holy Land when my mother can return back to Jerusalem, live in the house that our family come from, in peace with everyone else. At the moment, there is no sign of that, of course, but we have got to be hopeful, and what we've got to be working for that. Otherwise, with all the barbarity we've seen, we're only a few years away from this happening again. So I hope that we can find a peaceful way forward for everyone's sake, so that the children will grow up to aspire and to achieve what they want to. And that will be the only way to move us from where we are at the moment, a truly horrendous situation. We need some hope, and we need to work to continue to bring that hope on the streets of London and in other means we can. You're on mute.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Kamel, for your insightful contribution there. I just want to remind everyone who is watching online that if you do have any questions for either of our speakers, there will be a Q&A at the end. So please do leave your questions in the comment section on the Facebook and the YouTube live stream. Thank you again, Kamel, and talk soon. Our next speaker is Leah. Leah Levine has been an active campaigner for justice and equality, especially for more than 20 years on the rights of Palestinians. As one of many hundreds of thousands of people who joined or rejoined the Labour Party after Corbyn was elected as leader, she was forced to address the weaponization of anti-Semitism and its use to attack the left more broadly, as well as, of course, to undermine the growing movement for justice for the Palestinian people. Hence, Jewish Voice for Labour was created, which Leah co-chairs and represents on the International Jewish Collective for Justice in Palestine. Over to you, Leah.
Thank you. I've got some notes. If I look as if I'm reading, I apologize. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for inviting me here. It does feel an honor, and it's so nice to be on a platform. I don't want to get too chummy with Kamel, who, when I spent 3 months in the West Bank, I think that was when it was, and he was there for a Ramadan meal and invited me to be with his family in East Jerusalem, something I have never forgotten. One of the nicest meals and most warm, very heartwarming in many, many ways. So I'm here to bring you greetings and solidarity from Jewish Voice for Labour and from very many Jewish organizations. As we've heard, around the world, there is a collective of Jewish organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace and many others. I'll say a little bit more about that in my talk, from all over the world. And people are working very hard for justice and equality. Justice and equality for all between the river and the sea. And it is frankly ludicrous and alarming that saying that gets labeled as anti-Semitism, and that label is taken seriously by far too many in the mainstream media. A bit more of that later. I note that either today or yesterday, in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, an article was published, the title of which was "What Will Happen When the Holocaust No Longer Prevents the World from Seeing Israel as It Really Is," or as it is, sorry. And I'm trying to imagine such an article being published in the UK or the USA, and certainly not in Germany. Going back to some of the points that Kamel raised, Zionism, a belief in a state for Jews, was very much a minority view amongst Jews before the Holocaust. But it's worth noting that the more left-wing, more grassroots, trade union-based Bundesboycott Jews, this is people who believe that we belong where we are. So our job is to make our country safe for Jews and for other people too. And that persisted. You know, one of the heroes of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, when Israel desperately would have loved him to have come to Israel after it was founded, said, no, my job is to make Poland a place where Jews can be welcomed. And so they didn't talk about him very much. It's also worth, sorry, what I was saying was that those Jews were the most impacted, you know, the Eastern European, the poor Jews and the radical Jews, both as trade unionists and Jews, were the most likely to be affected, and they were really almost eradicated, those people in Eastern Europe. But I wanted to pick up from something that Kamal said about the Balfour Declaration. It's also worth noting that this Lord Balfour is before he became Foreign Secretary, I think was Home Secretary, don't quote me on that, but some years before the Balfour Declaration, it was him who introduced the first ever Immigration Act in the UK, which was the Aliens Act in 1905. And that was specifically designed to keep out the scruffy, poor and radical, Bolshevik at the time, Jews. And if we look at the Balfour Declaration, you know, based on what I said before about Zionism and having a Jewish state being very much a minority view, the only person in the cabinet who voted against the Balfour Declaration was Lord Montagu, who was the only Jewish member of the cabinet. And he saw the creation of a Jewish state as itself anti-Semitic. And it's also worth noting that some of the early Zionists, well before the Second World War, went to visit Palestine to think about how do we set up a Jewish state there, and came back saying, we can't have it there because it's full of people who were living their lives, so we can't do it there. But of course, their views were rubbished and dismissed. And so we may well, those of us who know about the history of anti-Semitism, you know, centuries of oppression, historically, you know, Kamal referred to the expulsion of Muslims and Jews at the same time from Spain, from Andalus, etc. But, you know, there's been, again, it's not the time to go into that in great deal. Those of us who understand that may have some compassion for people who think, well, maybe we need a Jewish state where we have our rights can't be taken away, even if we win them. It may be understandable, but what we're looking at is not some idealistic, mythical Jewish state, but an actual living, breathing Jewish state. And as Kamel described, a state born out of violence and terrorism. And actually, the horrors that we're witnessing today, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, are where we inevitably were going to end up, given the way in which it began. And no attempts to live peacefully side by side, but exactly to eradicate. I wanted to touch really briefly on Jewish Voice for Labour. I know Kamel has also left the Labour Party. Many of us are left in disgust at what happened to the Labour Party, or as for many of us, we were expelled, and that includes myself, effectively for being the wrong sort of Jews. And Jewish Voice for Labour was forced to come into being to fight the weaponization of anti-Semitism, to attack the moderately progressive policies known as far left of Jeremy Corbyn, but actually also in trying to silence the support for Palestinians. I have to say, I've given the last, well, since 2017, largely to this work, and I rather resent, and many of us rather resent, the amount of time and energy we have to put into this work, which is necessary, but it is nonetheless a distraction from the main struggle, which is for justice for Palestinian people after 76 years of displacement, at best second-class citizenship, violence, incarceration, bombardment, incursions, pulverization, and more, which I hardly need to tell you about. And the claim is that this is being done to Palestinian people to protect me. As you can imagine, this makes many of us in Jewish Voice for Labour and the International Collective extremely angry and very determined to continue to not only oppose the weaponization of anti-Semitism, but to participate in every struggle for justice. Many of you will have seen there's always a Jewish bloc on the London demonstrations. It is incredibly inspiring that after 7 months, not only in the UK, but around the world, actions are continuing. People have not tired of coming out onto the streets locally and for national marches. But it is disgusting in the extreme that hundreds of millions, if not a billion or more, people are marching across the world, and just to say, stop killing people. I mean, the most minimal demand, just stop it and get back to the table. And it's taken that much time and we're still not there, is completely appalling. And for those people who are worried about a real rise in anti-Semitism, beyond those who attest that saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free is anti-Semitic, this total conflation of Jews with Zionism, and even Jews with what Israel is actually doing from those who support Israel, is unsurprisingly going to lead to a rise in anti-Semitism. It's not right. Of course it's not right. But if Israel's supporters conflate the two, if Netanyahu tells me that he's doing it for me, it's not surprising. And, and I'm the wrong sort of Jew, a sham Jew, I've even been called, and worse. If the supporters conflate Judaism and Zionism, anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, it's not then surprising that sometimes in genuine distress, possibly lacking understanding, the deeper understanding, that some supporters of Palestinian rights also conflate the two. But this use of anti-Semitism against those of us who stand up for Palestine wasn't new in 2015 when Corbyn got elected, and it's being invoked in many countries, even now, while an ongoing plausible genocide is being conducted under our own eyes, with people in Gaza filming their own genocide. It is, yes, beyond words, really. The UK and the US have been very keen to shout anti-Semitism and, of course, hate marches, but even more certainly in Germany to try to silence voices such as mine and voices such as yours. This weaponization continues. As was said in my introduction, when I was so nicely introduced, I am one of the representatives on the International Jewish Collective for Justice in Palestine. There are Jewish organizations so far in about 16 countries, including the US, Canada, Brazil, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, several European countries, including Germany, where this nonsense has reached its zenith, so that, for example, you can have non-Jewish anti-Semitism advisors telling Jewish people who stand up for Palestinians that they are not being properly Jewish. My goodness, if there's ever a case of a place not learning the correct lessons from the Holocaust, it's sadly Germany. If they have, and the number of people who have not understood what never again means. So we end up with, as we will have heard in media interview after media interview, that Jewish students feel uncomfortable because of pro-Palestinian posters or because of the encampments, even when they sometimes note that there are Jewish students and faculty members in and supporting the encampments. They still fail to say some Jewish students feel uncomfortable. But frankly, why is this being taken seriously at all? If there's racism towards Jewish students, I would expect universities to deal with it as they do, or rather should do, about racism towards Black people or Muslim people or anyone else who feels discriminated against. They do not. They do not do that. And the Labour Party also does not. This is a very important issue, but it's not one for today. But the reason it is outrageous is that we are somehow supposed to make sure that Jewish people, actually we mean Jewish supporters of Israel, feel comfortable. But what about Palestinian students? In my own town, our MP wrote about the marches we had and the stores we had and actions that we did in Barclays and in shops to get people to boycott things. she said how terrible it was and how we have to look after make sure our Jewish residents feel comfortable. She has met with people who think like me, Jewish people. And many of us wrote into the local paper where she published an article saying, what about the Palestinian residents? I live in Hastings. And there are many here. And this whole ignoring of anyone, like no one's feelings matter as much as Jewish feelings. I mean, that's not protecting us. It's outrageous. And what about how comfortable humanitarians who are protesting a plausible genocide? How about how they feel? Sorry, I went up a bit too much. I wanted to read a little bit. Yes, I wanted to read a little bit from an article about protest that Nesreen Malik, you may have seen it in today's or yesterday's Guardian. She wrote an excellent opinion piece. And amongst other things she said, she's talking about the protests. There is also something about the projection of lurid intentions onto Palestinian solidarity and the calls for self-determination that misreads the very nature of protest as something that needs to be measured and rational in ways that are, however, never quite specified for it to be credible. But protest becomes necessary precisely because authorities have not been responsive, and it is defined by asymmetry of power and access to political tools. Politicians have executive power, and protesters have one thing: their voices. And that's where we're at. The politicians, so people are out on the street in their hundreds of thousands and their millions, and I say probably 1 billion or more around the whole world. And the politicians are refusing to act according to their own legal requirements. So on this day, when we remember the Nakba in the midst of the worst assault ever on Palestinian people, more people have been displaced than during that Nakba. We have to keep dealing not with some ideas and some feelings, but what the actual state of Israel is and what it is doing, which again, I don't need to go into, and Kamal described some things very thoroughly. And also to note that we have understandably focused on Gaza this evening, but we must also remember what is still happening in the West Bank and indeed in East Jerusalem. More people have been killed than I think at any time since the Nakba, just since October the 7th. There's been dramatic levels of death and even more dramatic levels of incarceration. The side of the hostages or the hostages that we don't hear about. Somehow Palestinians are prisoners and the Israelis are hostages. And that in itself gives a message. Attacks have escalated. Communities in the Jordan Valley and in the South Hebron Hills have actually finally given up and moved away because the settler violence has become so intolerable. And after October the 7th, as I'm sure many of you will know, they were then armed by the fascist part of the government to which Kamal referred. And just to skip back briefly to the Nazi era, we know that much of the international law that we use and we quote and we cite in relation to the rights of Palestinians to resist were created on the back of the horrors of the Nazi era, not only the horrors of the concentration camps and the gas chambers, but also of the occupation itself, the occupation of most of Eastern Europe, of France, much of Western Europe as well. And the rights of people to resist occupation is enshrined in law, up to and including violence or armed resistance. Now, personally, I have little time for Hamas, and I have much to criticize about the attacks on civilians on October the 7th. But in the morning when I first heard of the breakthrough or the breakout, I rejoiced. I was so happy that to be able to demonstrate that Israel was not invincible and that they couldn't pretend that they had dealt with this matter by just putting it behind barbed wire. And I want to note how come in our media the IDF is never called terrorist. And again, I don't want to take up too much time. I need to wind up. I would recommend, in terms of the West Bank, I'm amazed at myself recommending a BBC documentary. It's on iPlayer. It's called The Other War. It lasts about an hour, and a team embedded themselves in the West Bank for 5 weeks. And they are clearly very, very shocked at what the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, is doing. So back briefly to Gaza to conclude. I've been in regular contact with the family for several years there. As a family, it's when you hear these numbers. So those people, those of us who don't have many contacts in Gaza, and you can be very, very sympathetic and passionate about defending the rights of Palestinians without having to know individuals. But it's important to remember when we hear the 35,000 dead, the 70,000, 75,000, maybe 80,000 injured, the 2 million people who've been displaced, that these are all individuals with their individual hopes and dreams. And also to remember that, I've been in contact with this family for some years. And of course, they were in desperate straits long before October the 7th and the pulverization that has gone on since. That family has been displaced several times. They spent some months living in a tent in Rafah, and then it just became so intolerable. They decided to go back to Khan Yunis and live in, if not on, the rubble of their destroyed home. And as I said, I live in Hastings on the south coast, and Hastings, for coming up for 3 years now, has been, all of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign has been twinned with Al-Mawasi in Gaza. It's a fishing, Hastings is a fishing town, and Al-Mawasi is a fishing village. And they have had deep and long, ongoing relationships with several people there. And last week, so just over a week ago, a young woman who lives in Al-Mawasi, who knows some of our PSC members, her name is Rahaf Al-Kafana. Apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly. She sent a poem. She wrote it in English. She's 16 years old. And I'm going to end, I believe in amplifying the voice of Palestinians. And I've frankly spoken quite enough about Jews in this struggle and the weaponization of anti-Semitism, which is to distract us from the struggle, and to add more weight to the idea that the Palestinians are the people who are problematic. It's ludicrous. In fact, I have met unbelievably little. In fact, in my few trips that I've made there, I have heard not one word that is anti-Semitic. And when you consider what is being done to Palestinians in the name of the Jewish state, the determination of many people to make sure that children do not grow up hating Jews, and that they make the distinction between Jews and Israel, at the very least. Anyway, Rahaf wrote this poem, and she wants us to share it. I read it at the rally, an incredibly well-attended rally in Worthing. I mean, this is affecting everywhere. You don't have to be in a big city to be in action on this. This is, as I say, Rahaf Al-Kafana, and it will be the last thing I say. In Gaza's land, where bombs do fall, I'm just a girl, young and small, living in a war, a constant plight, my world filled with darkness, no trace of light. Through shattered streets and broken dreams, we fight for survival. It's not as it seems. Torn apart by guns and fires, my heart aches, my soul tires. In every corner, destruction looms. Children cry, mothers mourn in gloom. The sound of sirens fill the air. Fear and despair, my constant affair. I had a brother, brave and strong, but now he's gone, taken by the wrong. A victim of this endless fight, an innocent soul lost in the night. Oh, how I miss his laughter and smile. His presence made my life worthwhile. But now he's buried deep in the ground. With every ounce of hope, I'm bound. I walk the streets with heavy feet, each step a reminder of this brutal feat. My dreams shattered, my spirits crushed, but in my heart a fire still brushed. For in the face of war and strife, I find strength to embrace this life. Though pain may linger, hope survives. I am a fighter, my spirit thrives. In Gaza's land, My voice shall be heard. I'll shed light on the world with every word. I'll share my story, my truth, my pain, for in unity our freedom we'll gain.
Thank you so much, Leah. Really beautifully powerful poem there as well. Just going to open up the panel discussion now to questions for the Q&A segment. Again, if you do have any questions, please do leave them in the comment sections of the YouTube and Facebook live stream. So we have a few questions here already. One question for both Kamal and Leah. When talking about the Nakba, it's important to mention it was not only a one-time event, it is ongoing, and it has only continued from the 76th anniversary that we mark today. What are the stark comparisons you see from the last 7 months in Gaza and indeed all across Palestine the last 7 months to the scenes of the 1940s, which would be referred to now as the earlier stages of the Nakba? Can I go to you first, Kamal, then you, Leah?
Yeah. First thing I think is that the people who came to colonize Palestine see themselves as better people than the Palestinian people. So there is this Jewish supremacy that exists that translates itself into policies that are carefully crafted. So people think, well, that policy isn't too bad, but actually it discriminates between Jewish Israelis and everyone else. They have that privilege. So I think there's some of that. And what's happening in Gaza now is an extension of that. That these Palestinians, as I said when I was talking, they're not human beings. They are human animals. Anyone and when you hear a rabbi say that they should kill Palestinian babies because they will grow up to be terrorists, it shows you that mentality which cannot understand that when you're oppressed, you will fight back. And if they don't accept that they are oppressing the Palestinians and therefore the Palestinians have a right to fight back, that is part of the supremacy that exists. So I think that is the same as it was in 1948. The other similarity, I think, is the sheer committal of atrocities and massacres like the Deir Yassin massacre that will tell people you must leave. And that's what they're doing now. What this particular attack on the Palestinians is about an opportunity that these extremist leaders of Israel see to change the demography. So at the moment, there are 7 million Jews and 7 million Palestinians. If they succeed in expelling the Palestinians from Gaza, and I think the plan is to close Rafah so there's no contact with Egypt, that leaves this new pier that's being built. So if you then expel the Palestinians that way, you will change the demography from 7 million to 7 million to 7 million to 5 million. And then their attention will move to the West Bank to do the same to Jordan. That's really dangerous. And this is something that, since the Western powers like the UK are not doing anything about, they are complicit in this. Absolutely complicit, because that is what these extremist terrorist leaders want to do. So these are some of the similarities I see.
Shall I go, Farah?
Yes, please.
Thank you so much. So the question was the similarities and differences, I think. Is that right? So I think Kamal has touched well on the differences and maybe some of the similarities. I think one of the issues is that after 76 years, the Palestinians are still there. So from the Israeli point of view, it's like they didn't succeed. And they keep saying this as if it proves how they're not really anti-Palestinian, because if they were serious about kicking everyone out, they would have, obviously the numbers have grown rather than, so they're angry. But those 76 years, because they've always wanted to have control, at least of historic Palestine, if not a greater Israel. But the Palestinians haven't gone away. They're still there. And but they've also had 76 years of impunity. As Kamal said, the complicity of the Western powers in particular. They've had 76 years of impunity, and being allowed to get away with that for so long, the horrors, the terrible things from the Nakba, and as you said, the ongoing Nakba, I think has just escalated the levels of violence. And of course, the weaponry is greater as well, and even more unbalanced. So it's given rise to the most, the things that to me shouldn't, are just almost impossible to describe. To have Jewish people on Jerusalem Day walking through the old city, which is predominantly a Palestinian area, even though many settlers have taken over, but certainly historically it was overwhelmingly a Palestinian area, literally chanting, "Gas the Arabs." I mean, for those who know anything about Jewish history, what we're always being asked to go back to is to remember the Holocaust, the gas chambers, and so on. So to have Jewish people who are brought up with that, as part of our DNA almost, we have to remember the Holocaust, we have to remember, and we do have to remember the Holocaust. But it's like, how can they say it? To me, it makes no sense. But they've not only been saying it, they've been led at one point by one of the chief rabbis of the UK, went over there to lead that procession. So being allowed to get away with it, and I think what they're shocked by now, I think Kamal said this legal terrorism. So that actually the world is turning against them. They're so extreme what they're doing now, and because we can see it. So that's the difference. One of the differences is that people know what's happening, and they're shocked, and people are shocked by it. You wonder whether, as Israel has been wanting to take the space over, the whole land over for so long, how much. And I really don't want to get into conspiracy theories, but there's quite a lot of information around before October the 7th that Israeli soldiers who were monitoring the cameras were saying there's something happening, something big is being planned, and they were ignored. And according to a Woman's Hour broadcast, a male general, said to one of the women soldiers, who said, "But did you get my email? I've been very concerned. If you raise it with me one more time, I will send you to jail." Now, that was on Woman's Hour, so this isn't pro-Palestinian activism. So I see that yes, absolutely, it's a continuation, but because it's been continuing for 76 years, because they've been able to get away with it, A, it's escalated horrendously. B, it's even more entrenched. So, for example, in the earlier days, in 1947-48, David Ben-Gurion, this isn't defending him at all, and later in the 67 war, Moshe Dayan, who was the leading general, I think, of the time, they were just as bad as everyone else, but they recognized the humanity of Palestinians in that they said if they were Palestinians, they would have been resisting the way the Palestinians were. Now the people, how dare they? It's like they completely, it's not just othered Palestinians, they've forgotten that they're human beings. As Kamal was saying. Anyway, that's enough for the first question, I think. Thank you, Farah.
Thank you, Leah. We just have, I think, 2 more questions. The second question is in terms of upcoming elections, especially in regarding Britain. Although there are so many happening around the world this year, I believe it's there are the most elections ever on record globally. So in terms of upcoming elections where Britain is riddled with a 2-party system, either Sunak's Conservative Party that has aided and abetted the genocide in Gaza, or Starmer's Labour Party, where he himself was quoted saying Israel has the right to cut off water and electricity to the people of Gaza, leading to the mass starvation and intensified suffering we're seeing in Gaza right now. What options are there for the British voter in this year's election who does sympathize with Palestine and who does share concern in regards to our government's role in what's happening in Gaza? Should we start with you, Leah, then you, Kamal? Would that be okay?
Kamal may want to, may very well have much to say on this. I feel that actually we need to politically to be preparing for a Starmer-led Labour government, and we need to be really preparing for that because it's almost certainly going to happen. In terms of the election itself, there are movements to stand independent candidates, and there's been obviously lots of grouplings that have sprung up to try and address this gap for anyone who's remotely to the left of Keir Starmer and who supports Palestinian rights. I'm glad to say that the various groupings, so there's For the Many, I can't remember the name of them, there's something called Akisa, there are others, and Kamal may know more than I do, that they have come together into a collective to make sure that or do their best to make sure they don't stand candidates against each other. And that they're working at the moment on a statement about Palestine that candidates will be expected to sign up to. There may be other issues, but I've just seen a draft of one about Palestine. So find out who is standing, if anyone, in your local area, or get to an area nearby and support those campaigns. I don't think people are expecting necessarily to win, but I think it's really important that people who are so disillusioned, not only on the Palestine issue, see that there are alternatives developing. And what that could be, given the election is not far away, is part of building that movement that we need to build. Just as Gaza has galvanized the pro-Palestinian movement throughout the world and growing exponentially, we need to build a movement. Now, I'm a socialist, I'm very left-wing, etc., etc., etc. And I see these things as very connected. And in fact, I would say the reason they attacked Corbyn so hard wasn't so much because of his support for Palestine as his opposition to arms sales and the importance of arms sales, particularly for the British economy. That's a personal view. I haven't studied that. I think that's what they're very scared of. So there will be, in many, many places, if not everywhere, there will be independent candidates. They may be in a group. There might be like trade union and I've got the call for Socialist Coalition, Tusk. They've been around for a while. There may be this For the Many group, but they're going to stand sort of as independents. They're certainly not affiliated to it, but they will have some things in common. The Workers' Party under George Galloway, I think they've now been persuaded not to stand candidates against other good independents who are solidly pro-Palestine, and for justice for all, including the British people with disabilities or who are poor, etc., who have been treated appallingly. And I think it's all connected. But again, I don't want to take up too much time on that with my theories of the capitalist state. That's a whole other discussion. But thank you, Farah.
Thank you, Leah. Over to you, Clement.
Thank you. So what you mentioned, Farah, the statement that Keir Starmer made about Israel had the right to cut the water and electricity and power and so on, or the fuel. I was a member of the Labour Party, and I decided I couldn't stay in it as a Palestinian when this man was calling for a tightening of the siege, that the Palestinians would suffer, even that Israel had the right, and he's a human rights campaigner. The two things he mentioned are war crimes, cutting off the water and electricity and so on. So I resigned, and I published a letter that was well received as to why, because he had refused to meet the Palestinian community at any point since he was elected to discuss with us the position of Labour. This is before the 7th of October. But even since then, he met, the reply I had said that he had met Jewish people in a synagogue, and he had talked to aid agencies about the delivering aid to Gaza. He didn't even mention that he wants to meet Palestinians, to hear their stories, to hear about, just like you mentioned, Iman who'd lost family. Why doesn't he meet members of the Labour Party who are Palestinians? So I decided, as I say, I resigned. And then one of these calls I had was from a group who wanted to set up a new party. And they asked me if I would join it. And that started a process that led me first not to stand again to be the chair of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which I had been for the last 5 years, because I thought this was a natural progression. We've been on the demonstrations, we lobby our MPs. If I can get in and speak in Parliament, that's the next level in a democratic country. So on Friday, I announced that I will be standing for Parliament as an independent candidate, supported by a group that is Reliance, which will become a political party. But it will be distinguished from other parties because there will be no whip. And people on the call who are not from the UK may not understand what the whip is. It's basically that the party leadership tells its MPs how to vote. So they can't vote with their conscience, except on certain things they decide to let them. So I am standing in Birmingham, Selyoak. That is also significant because that is the constituency of the Labour MP who is the chair of Labour Friends of Israel. So that is someone who lauds Israel all the time, who transmits its lies, because that's what happens. His name is Steve McCabe, and I will be challenging him in Parliament. And whilst I agree with Leah that winning as an independent historically in the UK is extremely difficult, but this is the first time I think it's possible, because people feel politically homeless. You know, if you've had 1 million people marching in London, let's assume that half of them can vote. 500,000 people have a vote who will not be voting either for the Labour or the Conservatives. If they see alternatives, at least in their area, then who can come across and say, and that's another thing we're insisting on Reliance, is that people who come through will be people who have had the experience of life, who've been professionals. And I don't want to list rows. People will think that it's only lawyers and doctors and what have you. But no, people, midwives and others who've had the experience of life, who can bring that to Parliament, instead of many of these MPs who've not had a day's work outside Parliament. And therefore they cannot really understand what goes on outside. So, and I think on the Labour Party, I will certainly keep emphasizing that Keir Starmer had 10 pledges before he was elected, and he's reneged on all of them. That makes you, if you don't do what you say you will do, what does that make you? It makes you a liar. And if people want to vote for him, knowing that he reneged on these, and for people who care about the environment, again, at the stroke of a pen, they cancelled their policy on the environment. How can people vote for them? They won't be voting for the Conservatives and Rishi Sunak. And therefore, I think this is the first time where it's possible. And therefore, I'm more hopeful than it would have been in the past. And it just shows you, and let me emphasize, it isn't just Palestine and Gaza, because the same people who are out on these marches are facing the cost of living expense crisis. They are facing waiting for NHS services. They can't get a house. How many people look at their children now and think they're going to own a house, or they're going to be living in a house that's affordable? And you can take that all the way, but particularly, of course, start with ethical foreign policy, because the UK's foreign policy is unethical. So I will be campaigning as hard as I can to win. It would be great for me to stand in Parliament. Although the Balfour Declaration didn't go through Parliament, you can imagine what my first speech might contain if I win, that it will make some reference to that. So I do think people can start to look to other independents, maybe other smaller parties, but I think independents can be really representative of their area, and that's where I think there would be a difference.
Thank you, Kamal. Just the last question of the Q&A. There were quite a few questions kind of all addressing the same thing, so I thought I'd just concentrate it a little bit. So we're getting quite a few questions on what people at home can do to apply political pressure to stop the genocide we are seeing unfold in Gaza. What plausible actions are there, even specifically, talking about Britain and its significant role in arming Israel, its historic role in the formation of the settler colonial state of Israel through the Balfour Declaration? What plausible steps can people at home watching today's panel discussion? What can they take? Should we start with you, Kamal, then you, Leah?
Yeah, of course. First of all, the marches are really important to go out on them and to demonstrate, first of all, to the Palestinians, to be honest, that people hear them, they feel them, they want to support them, and that they are peaceful marches. For the students who have been so brave, I visited students again this afternoon at Birmingham University, where they've got an encampment, and others completely peaceful. There is absolutely no hint of any racism or bullying of anyone arising out of that. And the next generation is so important, and that's what they're demonstrating. And it is Palestine now, but it isn't just Palestine. They will, again, when they get to live in an area where the MP doesn't even answer their emails, they want to be different. And if they can get to be elected and maybe even play a role in changing the democracy that we have here to be better. I mean, sometimes I chuckle when I think that this broken democracy that we have here, where the people demand a ceasefire and the government and the opposition say no, this democracy is being sold to all other countries. You should adopt that sort of democracy. So I think they can do that. Definitely continue to barrage your MP with the messages on this and the government and if there is use boycott. It's really important now that the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement escalates, because how can anyone buy any Israeli goods? How can any organization have relationships with Israeli companies that could be complicit? So there are, indeed, there are some universities that have cut ties with the Israeli universities because they are complicit in research projects and so on that that they undertake with Israelis. And of course, just going back to universities should not be conducting research with companies that are on the list of United Nations banned lists, if you like, at the very least, and just adhere to international law and do that consistently.
Thank you, Kamal. Over to you, Leah.
Yeah, I think it's a little more of this what Kamal was saying. It's keep doing whatever you're doing, and if you're not doing so whatever you're doing, if you're out on every single march and every single local action, you will still feel it's not enough, because it's sort of never enough. But you can only do what you can do, and but it does make a difference. As Kamal said, the people in Palestine have got so much hope from the student actions in the United States, which is now expanded. I mean, I think there's 25 university encampments in the UK. Don't quote me exactly, but proportionally, it's probably getting there. But it's reached Japan, it's in Italy, it's in Canada, and and India, and so on. And they're not being forgotten, and people taking risks, because some of those students are, particularly in America. There was a really interesting interview on I think on mainstream media, where they interviewed this young man who'd been, and they'd interviewed the uncomfortable Jewish student I talked about before, and they interviewed this young man who was on the encampment, had been arrested, and he'd been banned from campus for 5 years. That means he has a record and he's not going to get his degree, and that has a huge impact. And in fact, in America, and quite possibly in the UK too, students get marked. If they're active in Students for Justice of Palestine, for example, they get marked. They don't get onto the master's courses. They don't get into the top law firms and so on. They're always reminded. This is the other thing. The lobby is so powerful, and we see it elsewhere. I see it about trying to book venues. The pressure that is put on little community organizations because they've got the wrong sort of Jew speaking or low-key performing or whatever it is. Do everything you can. Write to your MP. Every little thing, send an email a week to your MP saying, what more have you done? I haven't heard from you. Just keep doing it. If you're not already a member of a local Palestine Solidarity Campaign branch, join it. It is unbelievable how many new branches have been formed since October the 7th. how much stronger the existing ones. I don't know where you're all from. I can't see any of you, but those of you from the UK, if I tell you that I spoke at the launch of a branch in Tunbridge Wells, that begins this is like almost joke small c conservative town. And as I said, I spoke in Worthing on Saturday, little sleepy seaside place on the West Sussex coast. It's actually much more radical than it used to be, but nonetheless, well over 200 people out on a Saturday afternoon. So many of those people was good, and that was organised not only by the local Palestine Solidarity branch, but also by a group called Parents for Palestine. There are brilliant initiatives like that. So there were, at the end of the rally, at the end of the march, there were places for children to play, and it was very, you know, it's very peaceful. There will be something going on. Go to it. Volunteer to raise some money for medical aid for Palestine. But, you know, this is like non-contentious stuff. If you don't feel confident enough to handle any arguments, you know, basically people are being pulverized and we're trying to get medical aid to them. You know, it's non-contentious. But there may well be other people already doing it. Buy Palestinian products. Get your kefir and make sure you get it from Hebron and you don't get a Chinese takeoff. These are all little things. But every little thing, the more of us who do a number of the little things, the bigger difference is. Keep the pressure up. If there's someone, you know, I mean, the big marches are important, but actually a little local rally, or lots of places had emergency rallies last week at almost no notice. We had about 100 people out in Hastings, which is a small place. Obviously, there was a bigger event in London, but just to be together, just to make the connections, do everything you can. There's lots of advice, I'm sure, on the Palestine Solidarity Campaign website. Go to it. I can't believe there isn't a branch in your area if you're in the UK. And actually, wherever you are, there will be similar organizations. Don't think it's too little. You know, it's cumulative. It's cumulative. They are running scared. I mean, it's disgusting, as I said before, that it's taken 7 months of hundreds of millions of people marching around the world. But my goodness, it is having an effect. Much too slowly, much too slowly, because we know people are dying and being life-changingly injured, and more in Palestine, in Gaza in particular. But they are scared. They are scared of the power of this movement. That's why they have to label us as hate marchers and as anti-Semitic and as terrorist supporters and whatever other label they want to put on us. And people are getting arrested, not so much in the UK. My colleagues in Germany and Canada and America are just gobsmacked when I say, actually, I hardly see any police officers on the big marches. They're there, but they're not there in great numbers. And the little local march we had, there were 2 police officers, and all they did was, when someone came and started heckling us, they came and removed him. They didn't arrest him, but they removed him so that we could have our rally. Now, that doesn't mean the police are lovely and everything, but it's a very, very different situation from other countries. But we're not going to stop. You know, we might take a breather sometimes. Like, I'm not going to the demonstration on Saturday for reasons you don't need to know, not that interesting. But I forgive myself because I can't go all the time to everything. I do what I can, but I'm not going to stop. You know, I'm not going to stop. So don't stop. And the other thing is to keep amplifying voices. So I read that poem. There are brilliant poems that have come out of Palestine before and after this horrendous escalation from October the 7th. Read stuff yourself, be educated, look into the history, read really accessible things like Ilan Pappé's The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, so you get that story right back to 1948. Read things like people like Khadr Kami has written novels. You know, we don't have to read the heavy political analysis. These things are around, and there are book lists all over the place, and I'm sure the Palestine Return Center has produced, I can't remember, fantastic pamphlets with phenomenal amounts of information about the history and about the struggle. Read, and I think above all, give yourself the permission and the confidence, if you don't already have it, to challenge other people who come out with nonsense. If you're not quite sure, just keep, and the main thing is that you don't have to know everything. I don't know everything. I'm sure Camille doesn't know everything, but human beings are being treated as subhuman. And that's all that's the main thing. And it's not anti-Semitic to say that Palestinians are people. They're human beings who deserve the respect and the opportunities of every other human being. And the fact that it isn't the only place where terrible things are happening is irrelevant. You know, if someone says to me, "Oh, I'm doing lots of work to raise awareness about the Congo," I go, "Fantastic, fantastic. Count me in when you've got a fundraiser." I don't have the time and energy, but I'm really glad you're doing that. Similarly, people who are more active around Sudan, you cannot do everything, but you're here today because you're energized by this horrendous. I mean, there's lots of reasons why I think Palestine is the issue, but just don't give up. The Palestinians aren't giving up, and the reason they're not giving up is partly their resilience. They're phenomenal, Sumud, but also partly because they see that we're not going to give up, and them not knowing they're not forgotten, knowing that they're not forgotten, is part of it. I think I've said enough. Just find something that's going on and join it if you're not doing anything already.
Add something, Farah, if I may just add a message.
Yes, please.
At these marches, we've had lots of different blocks, a trade union block, health workers for Palestine block. I was so pleased and grateful to find that there is now, or there has been on many of them, a Jewish bloc, different Jewish organizations coming and marching. And I'll finish with I chuckled, and I think they chuckled, when they were, the Jewish bloc was forming. I think it was the first time they came out, and the police came and surrounded them. I said, "What are you surrounding us for?" And they said, "Because we want to protect you." They said, "We're part of that." I don't know if you were with them, Leah, but they said they were part of that, and they've spoken. We had the Holocaust survivor. I'm afraid I've just forgotten his name.
Stephen
Kaposh, and I met him and I thanked him, and I was, got a photograph with him, which I will treasure. So this is important. It is not about the religion. It's not about Judaism and Islam. And it's not about Jews and Muslims and Arabs and Palestinians and so on. It is about, this is why I started my talk with the ideology. It is about those who wanted to set up a settler colonialist state that wants to empty the land of its indigenous people, the Palestinians. And we want that regime. And again, I am not talking about the people. To be that regime, the apartheid regime should be dismantled. And that is the way we'll move towards peace.
Yeah. And can I add just a short thing? Because it's actually a little bit embarrassing how much the Jewish bloc is appreciated. I shouldn't need to be Jewish woman in favor of justice for Palestinians, because my main reason for being in favor of justice for Palestinians is because I'm a human being and I'm a humanitarian. Yes. But unfortunately, it is necessary to stand up as Jewish people who oppose how Palestinians are doing, as I said before, because they say it's being done in my name. So one of the marches, I think the one on Armistice Day, we decided we would peel off just before. So we come in onto block, so we meet slightly away from the main gathering point, so that we come in to make sure we come in as a block, and we're always applauded, which is a bit embarrassing. And this time when we peeled off, because obviously only the people who see us coming in see us, so we peeled off to the side and did some chanting from the pavement so that more people came and hugged us. With the emotion was so strong. I don't think I don't think we deserve that. We're just there because we think we should be there as human beings, and we know it's powerful to organize and be seen as a Jewish bloc on this subject. But as Kamel has said, it's not to do with Jews. It's the religion. It's not to do with. They try and make it like it's Jews against Muslims. It's so not. One of the nicest things locally, we had a march that was organized by the mosque here, one of the marches locally. And organised in conjunction with Palestine Solidarity Campaign. And this first speaker from the mosque made exactly the point that Kamel has made. We have no problem with Jews, no problem with Jews. We have a problem with Zionism and what Zionism has done to the Palestinian people. He said, Muslims and Jews have always lived together. We left Andalus together, he said. It was so beautiful to have such a long view of history. And when I spoke a few speakers later, he came up afterwards to thank me so much and to make that connection. And it was so great. But yeah, just do whatever you can. And even if it's get some boycott Israeli goods stickers and be careful, but nip into the supermarket and stick them on a few avocados. As long as they're from Israel, of course. But yeah, the conversations with other people in your circle who've bought the rhetoric, who buy the mainstream media stuff. Oh, well, they're terrorists and da-da-da-da. Well, Hamas may be terrorists, but the things didn't start on the 7th of October. Hamas has only been in existence for about 30 years, and we are today commemorating 76 years of the Nakba. This is not Hamas's fault. And another point, sorry, this is not in answer to your question, so it's very cheeky, if I may, Farah. And it relates a little bit to that quote I gave from Nesreen Malik. People have tried peaceful resistance. The first Intifada was relatively a stone throwing or, comparatively non-violent. When you consider they're throwing stones at armored vehicles, they're not throwing stones at Israelis. And out of that, I suppose you could say we got the Oslo Accords and the Palestinian Authority. And the Palestinian Authority have tried to collaborate, I can't think of the word, but anyway, to work with the Israeli government to try and help to build an infrastructure for a Palestinian government. And has that peaceful approach where they've actually, I would use the word collaboration. Kamal may have different views or may want to say something, but that they have actually helped to police opposition. They've helped to not round people up, but they've helped to sort of identify people who Israel thinks may be threatening. How has it helped the Palestinians in the West Bank? Has it stopped settler expansion? Has it stopped settler attacks? No. And so it's hardly surprising and in Gaza, the peaceful resistance, things like the March of Return, totally peaceful, where people just march to the edge of Gaza, to the fence, to demand their right to return, to protest that they had the right to return to their ancestral lands, and were shot, killed, severely wounded. The number of amputees in Gaza, long before October the 7th, is astronomical because of things like that. So the peaceful approach has not worked. And that's not the Palestinians' fault. That's because the authorities have not responded positively. And that's because of this extreme othering of Palestinians. And in terms of what you can do, just keep reminding everybody that Palestinians are human beings. And some people say, "Oh, the Palestinians are so wonderful." Sorry, Kamel, and sorry, Farah. "Oh, the Palestinians are so wonderful." And I go, it's pretty infantilizing of, Palestinians aren't all wonderful. And actually, that's not why I support the struggle for their rights. I support the struggle for their rights because the rights have been taken away. They don't have to be nice people to deserve their rights. We can admire their resilience, but they don't have to be nice people to deserve our support, though many of them are, of course. Thank you, Farah.
Thank you, Leah, and thank you, Kamal. And I think just to emphasize one point whilst wrapping up, to emphasize one point that you both mentioned, that this isn't anything at all about religion. This is everything to do with settler colonialism. It's not Muslim and Jew, it's settler and native. And I think that point is good to emphasize as well for people at home who are wanting to explain the situation to the people around them, to their friends, their families, their colleagues. The issue has always been settler and native. And also as well, another thing that people can do as well. I don't work for Macklemore, but Macklemore has recently released a single called Hin's Hall. where he summarizes everything to Palestine under 2 minutes, and all the funds, when you stream the song, all the funds go to UNRWA, which is much needed right now. So thank you both, Kama and Leah, for your time and your invaluable contribution. Please do keep your eye on the Palestinian Return Center's social media, as PRC has more webinars and panel discussions just like this one coming up soon. Thank you and good evening.